My name is Sarissa Tanner. I'm a producer at Meta and a documentary filmmaker myself. So it's very exciting to be here with this group, and I'm a lifelong fan and customer of North Face. So this is just really incredible to have the three of you in the same virtual room. So I'm going to pass it over to you guys to introduce yourselves, and we'll get started.
Yeah. My name is Biz. I'm a media director at the North Face. And for this particular film, I was executive producing and working with Carol. We partnered with the incredible production agency that Lindsay is part of, Gnarly Bay. And I will pass it off to Carol.
Hi, I'm Carol. I lead global sustainability at the North Face and was absolutely thrilled to get to work with Biz on this project, and Lindsay too.
That leaves me. Hi, I'm Lindsay. I'm head of development at Gnarly Bay, but also the director on this project. And I focus primarily in the documentary space, but dabble in commercial social campaigns as well.
Awesome. So let's just dive into the origin story. How did this film, I should call it an episode, how did the project come about?
So Carol's the lead of our sustainability team at VF, and Carol has an incredible partnership with on-the-ground farmers. The story kind of came about, I will let Carol speak more to that, but we just identified that there was potential for sharing some of those farmer stories and really getting to know some of the people within the actual supply chain. And so Carol, you can kind of take it from here.
Sure, yeah. So I was able to visit some of our cotton farmers in 2020. And the farmers that we're working with specifically for regenerative cotton are all based in the United States. And I met the Kahles family on that trip and was just blown away by them and how passionate they were about this work. And when I got back, I put together a deck for the marketing team where I try to pitch all of the fun sustainability stories that are coming up to see if marketing is interested in featuring any of them. And the Kahles were part of this deck. And I'm so glad that Biz and her team looked at the story. We had pictures of the farms, the families that we had visited, and decided to make this episode about them.
What stood out to you about their particular story? And there's a lot of stories out there. What about this story, their farm, these characters made the makings of a good film?
The Kahles are they're fifth generation farmers, Eric and Dawn, and they stood out to me because they're young farmers, relatively young for the demographic in the US, and they're super open-minded. They are really interested in doing everything they can to benefit the health of not just like our planet, but they're also very interested in their own family's health. They had some health problems, and they saw regenerative agriculture as a way to really think about what they're putting into their bodies and what they're also producing on their farm. And that was really, really awesome and just new to hear from farmers. The connection between human health and soil health is so strong in their story, and we felt it was just something we had to feature.
What spoke to you about the story, Biz?
I think that often when you think about films in like the environmental or sustainability space, they can feel really heavy with statistics, or there's not often a face associated with it. And so to be able to talk to Carol and hear her enthusiasm for these farmers, and then be able to talk to them and just really personalize this story of sustainability. We kind of called it like the Trojan horse, because when you can when you can feature somebody who has such a connection to the land and to this issue, and then kind of Trojan horse the science after that, you build this like emotional connection first. We felt like it would be such a great tool for sharing our reasons behind why we really support regenerative agriculture with a huge global audience. And so I think that was what was really exciting about this series as a whole, was being able to feature farmers on the ground who are doing this work, but actually give them a voice and a space to share that story themselves.
And then Lindsay, what about the story spoke to you?
I mean, a lot of what both of these women just said definitely resonates. We're all on the same page. But with any story that has any sort of like CTA at the end, I always try to look at it with the A story and the B story, your CTA being the B story and your human story being the A story. So in this case, there was a very strong A story that I think resonates with the viewer, regardless if you're into farming, you know anything about farming, if you even know a farmer, you understand the values that the Kahles bring to the table. And we can all align that we want human health, we want health for our neighbors, and we want to support one another. So I think that's the entry point, that emotional appeal that Biz mentioned. And as you get to know them, you get to understand what they've been through and really the why for their practice and their adjustment in practice. That's where you start to fall in love with them and start to want to care about farming, regardless of your entry point. So they just had a great story through and through, and there's wonderful people beyond the farming component, just amazing people.
Yeah. Biz, how did you think, and why were you interested in partnering with Lindsay on this? Because I'm assuming you were the person who brought in the potential filmmaker to make the film. How did you know her work, or what was that process like?
Well, I've been a fan of Gnarly Bay and specifically Lindsay's work for a very long time, but Lindsay had a connection with one of our producers. Well, more than one producer. But anyway, we've been looking for opportunities. The North Face had been looking for opportunities to work with Lindsay and her team for a bit. And this felt like the perfect space to do that. Lindsay is so incredible when it comes to telling these like very human-centric stories. Even though it's for a brand, we didn't want it to feel like a commercial. We didn't want it to feel like a brand, because that would feel like we were kind of like wrongdoing for the subjects themselves and the intensity of the topic. And so being able to have the story shine first above just us being a brand, I think was really important to us. And working with Lindsay was a great way to do that. And the team was just incredible. So we were all on the ground together, which was really fun. And it was a really small team. So I'm super proud of the work that we made.
Yeah, it's beautifully crafted. Lindsay, I'd love to get a little bit into the process of making it. For the non-filmmakers, tell us what all the work, well, maybe highlights, not every little thing, but what have you done before you show up to film? What has gone on? What makes you feel ready to film?
Well, in order to get to that A story, I had to first do a lot of research on the B story. So I needed to work very closely with Carol to understand all the jargon and make sure I was asking the right questions when it comes to regenerative ag and the work that the Kahles are doing on the ground with the soil. So I was doing a lot of research, a lot of reading. Dawn actually gave me a soil health book that I've continued to read since the shoot, and I've like totally just latched on to the regenerative movement, and it's piqued my interest beyond this project, which has been really, really cool, because you do take your documentary work home with you. But beyond the influence they've had on me, prepping for this shoot, I mean, we were doing a lot of pre-interviews. I had to get to know like the emotional component that was going to drive the beginning of the series. This is our launch episode, so we wanted it to be really compelling. So we did tons of pre-interviews. I got to spend a lot of time on the phone with Dawn and Eric. Lots of preliminary research. We storyboarded this first episode. I wanted to kind of strike a balance between docu-narrative approach with some more setup, intentional shots and transitions. And part of that is because I feel like in the farming sector, there can be a lot of just critical analysis of folks' stories. So by taking a bit of a docu-narrative approach, I think narrative opens people's minds and kind of sets them in this like entertainment space. And then once they're hooked in this entertaining story, then they can sit in and like enjoy the ride versus having like their critical docu hat on. So that was something we kind of played with, that I feel like works. But when you start the film, you'll see it like kind of feels narrative at first, and you realize it's a doc. So that was something we played with, and hopefully it worked.
Oh yeah, definitely. I've watched that opening sequence, well, the whole film many times, but particularly everything leading up to the truck. And he's trying to turn the engine on. I mean, the truck is teed up in their conversation, the truck, and then you come back to the truck. Well, it ends with him putting his head down, and then you come back to the truck at the end where he's putting his head up to you wove it back into the end. It was so beautifully well done. And now those opening shots moving through the window out to the truck, just really impeccable.
They were tedious.
I know. I can only imagine.
Set up.
How long were you guys shooting for?
We did 2 different shoot windows. I want to say our first one was like 3 days, and then maybe 4 days on the back end, but 2 short shoot windows. Yeah.
Carol, I'd love to get sort of your thoughts on, as the sort of quote unquote non-filmmaker. Now you are, if you've been on a shoot, you're everybody's a filmmaker at heart. What was your experience like? What stood out to you? What was surprising about going through the process? And what, if any, advice you have to being sort of like the stakeholder in the room, like the person that is not part of the creative team per se?
I loved that. Well, first of all, Lindsay and Biz taught me all the terms, so I I knew what they were saying when we were on set. There were a lot of terms for me to learn. But I really appreciated how open they were to, they were always asking me, like, did we capture what you think is most important when we were doing interviews? There was just a lot of opportunity for me to chime in, which was wonderful. And I think that because, Lindsay had talked to the Kahles, we did so much work up front. When we landed and showed up at their house, it was almost as if, I felt like it was like a reunion for me, and I don't know about Biz and Lindsay, but we were just so welcomed into this family. We went to Eric's parents' house. We were at Don and Eric's house. It made it so fun, and everything just flowed so well because we were just hanging out with these amazing people. And me as a sustainability person, asking them tons of questions about what they're doing on the ground. Because I'm not a farmer, but what they're doing is so important. I just wanted to soak it all up and learn from them as much as I could, while Biz and Lindsay and Chris were doing the hard work of like getting the right shots and the film made. So yeah, it was just wonderful to work with them. I think if it had been any other family, it would have been a very different experience. And so having the Kahles just be so open to us invading their space and welcoming us to their family for so long was wonderful.
And Biz, tell us a little bit more about your role. What are you kind of the glue between the filmmaker and the brand? You have a foot in both worlds. Like, are you the translator, facilitator, or how do you see your role? And what do you like about your role, I guess, too?
Yeah. Well, this was actually my first time executive producing. I traditionally come from the doc space as well. So for the North Face, I'm kind of like the internal doc person. So it was, my role for this film was to be the bridge between Gnarly Bay and the North Face, and to also work with Carol to make sure that even though we didn't want it to feel like an extremely branded doc, that it did uphold North Face values. And Gnarly Bay was so instrumental in and open with making sure that we had space as clients to come forward and give creative visions or talk with them about, how we felt like the story would best fit in with the North Face ecosystem. But on a personal level, it was really new. It was a new role for me. So I was learning a lot around what an executive producer does on set, and honestly was super antsy because I'm not used to like not holding a camera. So it was so much fun. But yeah, it was just a new space. And I think it's often hard when you are in a new space to feel kind of like held to experiment and to really bring yourself to that. But this entire group of people never made it feel awkward or uncomfortable to be in a new role. So thanks for that, y'all.
It's wonderful. And in terms of the getting into the brand side of brand storytelling, I think there's the question of, why make something, a documentary of this in this format? Like, the argument could be made, we could do a 30-second ad and tell the same story. What's your response to that?
You can show me a 30-second ad that tells the same story, but I don't know if I've seen one. But I think I don't know. It's hard to answer that from like a brand perspective, because I think all of us bring so much of ourselves into this work. And from a personal level, the depth in which you can get to know someone through film, even if you're just an audience member, is so important to transforming maybe the way that you think or solidifying the way that you think. And this is such a challenging topic, I think, for brands to bring to the table for a myriad of reasons. But there's something, I mean, I'm obviously a filmmaker, so I believe in the power of film, but I don't think it can be matched through an ad or a product, but I do think they work within an ecosystem. It has to be more than just one film. I mean, Lindsay can definitely talk to that, around how you can maybe beef out a film to work within that ecosystem, but it can't just like live and die on YouTube.
I'll just add that from a sustainability perspective, I work in greenhouse gas emissions and scope 3 science-based targets, measuring environmental impacts all day long. And that's not the exciting part of the work that we had done to get regenerative cotton into our supply chain. It was really the fact that there are these amazing farmers in the US who are taking huge risks with their livelihoods. When you're a farmer and that's your main source of income, it is a massive risk for you to take those chances, like what the Kahles did. So we got their cotton, we've been sourcing this cotton into our products, but that's not the exciting part. It's really being able to highlight the work that the farmers are doing, because that truly is the hardest work on the ground. And it's the work that more consumers and our customers need to hear about. And so I'm so glad we were able to make this episode about it.
Lindsay, you work in long form and you do commercial work too. Could you talk a little bit about sort of the benefits of, longer form storytelling that is more in depth? What do you get out of that versus doing more commercial work?
Yeah, for me, it's all about the emotional connection. And if I can find a way to work with a brand to tap into the brand ethos through a compelling human narrative, like, that is the creme de la creme for me. And if we can build a whole 360 campaign around it and target audiences where they're expecting to see, make maybe short form content and driving traffic accordingly and getting butts and seats at film festivals and panels and creating discussion. Like Carol said, like, these farmers are taking tremendous risk. And I firmly believe that as a storyteller, like, I want to share the stories that I want to see more of in the world. And sometimes one farmer, one person just needs to see themselves represented in order to be willing to step into the unknown. It's a little less scary. So for something like this, like, it's a cause I firmly believe in. So of course I want them to be able to be propelled forward by us sharing their story.
And there's something about applying the power of narrative film to a brand that is in a league of its own, and that there's just, it has a power to connect with people emotionally the way that film does, in a way that's really powerful. So talk a little bit about how you guys decided or wanted to incorporate the North Face brand into the story, into what you see on film.
This might be a cop-out, but because these are farmers that actually work within the North Face supply chain, it almost felt like we didn't need to do anything else beyond that. I think we, as a brand that sells clothes, we're able to gift them a lot of clothes that could be worn and used while they work on the farm. And it was really fun to have them, like, we had 2 shoots. So the first shoot, we were gifting them a few items. And when we came back, it was like, he had been wearing the same hat and it was really dirty. And like, he actually loved those items. It wasn't like we had to like ask him to put on a perfectly new shirt. It was stuff that he was already wearing. So that was fun. But beyond that, I mean, there wasn't like a ton of discussion, except it felt very North Face from the original point. But yeah, Carol, Lindsay, do you have anything to add?
I think this is like a filmmaker's ideal approach when working with a brand. And like, you guys were so chill in the sense that we weren't like jamming it down anyone's throat. It wasn't so overtly branded. It was being uplifted through the North Face, which I loved. And where I've seen success, like if you are going to have those overt branded deliverables, they can be derivatives from the main film. Like, let the film do the storytelling, let it not be distracting, and let it really emotionally resonate, and then have your cut downs and your more hard hitting branded assets if you need to. So we're all speaking the same language, which made it so easy.
I was wondering if you each had like a favorite. I had so many lines that I loved, and I'm wondering if you have a favorite line that you loved, or a favorite shot or moment that really stood out to you when you watch it.
I have a line that Eric said. He says, in order to make a change, you've got to stay in the game. And that is like, anytime I'm feeling frustrated or down on myself, no matter what it applies to, I'm like, okay, this is going to suck for a little bit and then it's going to get better. And I have to stick it out. So that resonated.
How about you, Carol? Was there a line or a moment that pulled on your heartstrings or inspired you?
Well,
Or
I
it just really spoke to the meaning of the film. Sorry.
Yeah. I will admit, and Biz, I hope you aren't upset that I'm going to say this to Biz and I, when we were doing the interviews, I mean, we like cried. Everything that the Kahles family was saying was just so meaningful and beautiful. And they're so supportive of each other. So I love what Eric said, that line too. And I guess to pick something else, I think that moment at the end when Nancy pats Monty on the leg and talks about how proud they are of him and Dawn and their family. That's like, yeah, it's just, they're so supportive of each other. And that is so important in making this work, really embedding this work in their whole lives and everything that they do.
How about you, Biz?
Yeah, all of those moments. Carol and I, we've done a few films together and we realize we cry a lot in the best way possible when we're talking to, doing interviews. But I think in this particular film, we did have a lot of conversation around not wanting to villainize traditional farmers because they are part of this bigger system that sometimes they might get stuck in. And it is really hard to change because they're risking their entire livelihood. Carol was talking about this before. And so it was a really fine line between wanting to share all of the beautiful work that the Kahles were doing and learning about regenerative agriculture without making it seem like we had a villain or like an anti-hero or something. But for me, the line that really sticks is when Nan is talking at the end about that particular, I don't even remember the exact line she says, but something about like, I don't blame them, I think is what the line is. And it really gives nuance to this very complicated systemic issue within farming. And that just like hits me every time.
One thing that stood out to me is maybe it's like it's maybe at the end of Act 1 or like sort of at the end of the first third. I think it's the grandmother, and she said the thing that was missing was education, and like the farmers didn't understand the dirt. And it, to me, as you think like, oh, a farmer would know their dirt, like that's, but maybe Carol, you could talk a little bit about that moment and what was going on there.
Yeah, Eric talks about it a little bit too. Like in farming, there are people telling you what you need to do, and it's salespeople for companies that are trying to sell them something. And so and And those are folks that farmers have trusted. And so they've tried these different chemical applications and all the fertilizers and all the different types of chemical inputs. And it's really eye-opening to just think about the communication and the information that farmers get is so narrow, can be so narrow in scope. And, what got the Kahles first interested in regenerative agriculture was that they went to a workshop and they learned about what it was, and then that got them intrigued. And Eric went home and purchased a ton of cover crop seeds and planted them. And it just turned out that year that he had planted them, they had an extreme rain event. And because he had cover crops, his topsoil didn't run off with the rain, like his water was running clean, which like visually you see the impact of that right away. But it took that opportunity to go to that workshop to learn about these things to pique their interest. So it's definitely something that, we feel more farmers need access to this information. Hopefully this film is also opening some eyes.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about the life of the film? Like how people have been reacting to it? Or other farmers seeing it? Or do you want to try to get it in front of other farmers? Or what happens? What's the life of the film once you make it and you release it into the world?
Well, it was launched digitally first, with a little bit of social promo, but I know we're kind of ramping up. I don't know how much I can say this, but ramping up in 2024, leading up to Earth Day, I think is some of the discussion we've been having. Aside from that, we've had a really amazing festival run. And then we've actually been doing some grassroots organizing and putting on community screenings and panel discussions. So we were able to do one in Boulder County. Both Biz and Carol were able to attend. We put on a panel with the North Face marketing and sustainability team, in addition to some local farmers and other groups that are working within the regenerative ag space. And we were able to fill a room with about 200 audience members from all different walks of life who were just interested either in food or the food farming connection, wanting to get to know their farmers, wanting to understand how we're sourcing raw products. It was an eye-opening, just like community event. The interest was insane. We had lots of follow-up afterwards. And then I was recently up in the UP in Marquette, Michigan, for a screening of the film. And the local farmer there came up to me afterwards and said how much it moved him. And he had been fighting to legally keep his regenerative biodynamic farm open. So he was like really inspired by the work that the Kahles were doing. So I've had great feedback from the farming and agriculture and food community specifically.
Awesome. Just sort of closing thoughts, like what advice would you have to, somebody who wants to do sort of long form brand story? Let me start over. What do you have any sort of thoughts you'd share to the aspiring marketer who wants to do brand storytelling that's a little more long form, not your traditional advertising campaign? What words of encouragement or advice would you have for that person?
I'll have just a quick note, because I do work on the front end from like sales, pitching, and development and strategy, beyond directing. And in this film project, I've been really fortunate to be able to kind of wear both hats, which has been fun. But I think thinking about strategy, packaging, and rollout right from the jump is critically important, especially if it's an impact related film. You just need to be able to target your audience where they're looking for content, and making sure that you're making deliverables that are going to catch them at the point of the funnel where they're expecting to be caught, and then driving traffic, whether it's to a landing page or some sort of call to action initiative. And then I would also supplement any sort of call to action film with some sort of impact campaign or educational distribution. I think that helps do a lot of these projects justice.
And I guess, Lindsay, too, what advice would you have to a filmmaker who's wanting to do some brand storytelling with a brand?
I started pretty guerrilla style. I would just latch onto stories that really compelled and moved me on a personal level. form intimate connections with the subject of the film, understand what their goals are in sharing their story, and you become their greatest advocate. And you can, have a lot of success starting with the story first and taking it to brands. But you do need to be ready to understand that there has to be a really intentional marketing strategy behind it, because all of these marketing execs need, KPI and return on investment in order to sell anything through. So you might not have luck just pitching your beautiful 10-minute, 12-minute film. You're going to have to be creative about how you market it and what you're open to. But knowing your guardrails, I think, is really important too.
I love thinking about it as being an advocate for the folks who are sharing their story, because it is such a privilege and an honor to sit with somebody as they go through maybe their life or whatever it is that you're sitting down to talk with them about. And I think it's really important to not let that be overshadowed by a brand or your want for the story, to always put their best interest first. Because I think if they have a good experience, that will then be in the outcome of the film itself. Because I've seen so many beautiful but very empty stories or films out there, and I think it's really important to first start with the story and the people that you're working with.
I'll just add, building off of what Biz said, that authenticity in the storytelling was so important. And I feel like the film was so beautiful and amazing because we had such strong relationships with the Kahles, and we really got to know them. We got to talk to them about so much of their personal lives and their family history and what they've been through and health challenges. And like Biz was saying, it was honestly a privilege to be able to tell their story. And because we weren't coming at it from an advertising perspective, or like we're going to slap the whole family head to toe in TNF products as we make this film, it wasn't about any of that. It was really about uplifting their story. And I think that authenticity is super important, because as a brand, I'm not a filmmaker and I'm not in marketing, but to me, it could cross over into exploitation or just using farmers to sell products so easily. And that was not the intent behind this film at all.
Well, thank you guys. This has been a really fun, inspiring conversation. It's a beautiful film. Everybody should go watch it if they haven't seen it yet, and just keep making great, powerful work like this is all I can ask. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.